Now remember, this is a card story, all right? Card story, not a card trick. I know you're going a million mile an hour about. Okay, here we go. Two guys Saturday night meet in a hotel lobby out in West Texas. One guy says to the other guy, he says, "You from around here?" He says, "Well, I am, but I live clear across town." He says, "Well, you know, Saturday night, being out of town," he says, "I'm used to a little get-together, a little hell-raising, a little beer drinking." He goes, "What happens in this West Texas town?" He goes, "Well, not very much." He said, "But I'll tell you what." He said, "There's a one-man taxi right outside the door." He said, "Jump in it and see what you can find." Cut the cards, please. I always do that, so.
It's dramatic, thank you.
So he jumps in the taxi. He goes 1 block. He goes 2 blocks. He goes 3 blocks, and there he comes back again. He said, "Well, what'd you find?" He said, "I tell you what." He said, "I found 4 cowboys that are willing to party with us." He said, "Really?" He said, "Well, where'd you find them at?" He said, "Well, I drove along town." He said, "I come up on this little nightclub called the 678 Club." He said, "Really?" He said, "And they charged me $2 to get in there." He said, "Well, that's great." He said, "I tell you what, though." He said, "I don't party with just cowboys." He said, "We need some women to party with." He said, "Jump back in that taxi." You cut the cards, Mary, Lee, or Glenn, or... He said, "Jump back in that taxi and see what you can find." So he jumps back in that taxi. He goes 1 block. He goes 2 blocks. He goes 3 blocks. He goes 4 blocks, and there he comes back again. He said, "Well, what'd you find?" He said, "Well, I'll tell you what." He said, "I found 4 old gals." He said, "They're a little long in the tooth." He said, "But they'll party with us." He said, "Where'd you find them at?" He said, "Well, I went around town." He said, "I didn't come up on anything." He said, "I finally come back to that 678 Club." He said, "And I'll be doggone if they don't charge me another $2 to get in that pot liquor." He said, "Okay." He said, "Well, I tell you what." He said, "We got enough here for a little gathering." He said, "We need somebody to kind of tend bar for us, bring us drinks, and kind of wine and dine with us with these women." He said, "So jump back in that taxi." Here, Daryl, cut him, will you? He said, "Jump in that taxi and see what you can find." So he jumps back in the taxi. He goes 1 block, and he goes 2 blocks, and he goes 3 blocks, and there he comes back again. He said, "Well, what'd you find?" He said, "I tell you what." He said, "I found 4 guys." He said, "They're willing to tend bar for us, but they want some free whiskey in exchange." He said, "No problem." He said, "Where'd you find that at? Where'd you find them at?" He said, "I'm not even going to get into it. 678 Club." He said, "That's all there is in this old West Texas bar." He said, "I'll be doggone if they didn't charge me another $2 to get in there." He said, "All right." He said, "Well, we got it taken care of." He said, "I'm going to give you a $50 bill." He said, "I want you to jump in that taxi, go buy 4 bottles of whiskey, and get back here as quick as you can." Here, JP, will you cut him? So he jumps back in the taxi. He goes 1 block. He goes 2 blocks. He comes back again. He said, "What'd you get?" He said, I got to the liquor store." He said, "All they had is that old Ace High whiskey." He said, "It's not bad, but it's pretty cheap." He said, "You can get a little buzz on it." He said, "The lady broke my $50 bill, 10, 20, 30, 40, 45, 50. And I'll be doggone if she doesn't charge me $2 to break my $50 bill." He says, "All right." He says, "How old are you?" He says, "I'm 34 years old." He said, "Well, where do you live?" He says, "I live right on the corner of 34th and 45th Avenue. He said, "Really?" He said, "Well, somebody your age probably plays a lot of cards." He says, "Play cards?" He said, "Every week, Thursday night, I never miss a beat." He said, "I had the weirdest thing happen to me last Thursday night." He said, "I had a pat hand dealt to me, and I lost." He said, "You had a pat hand and lost?" He said, "I sure did." He said, "Well, what'd they do to you?" He said, "They dealt me 4 9s. He said, "Well, what in the world beat you?" He said, "That right there."
4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That's a good story.
A round of applause.